in terms of when we start with the poor who are living in and around forest areas, and there are various estimates of how many different groups and how many millions of Indonesians still live in and around the forest areas. I think that the expansion of palm oil, which is takes large areas, millions of hectares of land, and turns it into monocultures, has detrimental effects. Now, the bank, on the other hand, and the re-engagement policy is, from their side, they're claiming is trying to improve the emphasis on smallholders and on sustainability issues in comparison to what would already be happening by private sector companies. So I guess the defense of the bank by the bank is that re-engagement should have a slightly positive effect on the livelihood of the poor, although I don't see them getting involved in levels of wages and compensation, nor involved in the dedicated contracts with CPO processors that would affect the level of livelihood. I mean, it's a jobs and growth type strategy. As long as we create numbers of jobs, I don't think the re-engagement is not. If anything, I think they would be concerned the other way, that if wages were to rise, that this would make the investment less profitable and less expansion less likely. So I don't see them coming in as defenders. Well, the kinds of jobs, I mean, I think there are two big moments in the palm oil. I mean, each commodity has its particular characteristic. One is the land clearing, which is this kind of controversial issue because the World Bank and the Indonesian government and some of the palm oil companies themselves have said that they would like to build the plantations on land that's already cleared, already deforested, or at least degraded, not on heavily forested or primary forest land. But again, there's obviously incentives there for some of them to bend or break those rules. Now, how much they're doing that is always a tricky game, because there's plenty of degraded forest as well. So there are jobs in land clearing. Then there are certainly jobs in planting, and there are jobs in harvesting, because palm oil, I'm going to forget how quickly, but once you cut the fruit, you can't keep it for very long. It goes bad quickly, so you've got to get it from field to factory to get the oil out of the kernels in a relatively short amount of time. And that's where also, if you have monopoly buyers on the other end, and if there's any disagreement on price or compensation, it's probably pretty easy, like with some other commodities like sugar and others, for the processors to have the upper hand in this, because if they don't accept the produce coming in from the workers, and then it's just drying up or rotting, then the workers don't get anything out of it. Well, I think this is, I guess, the thing, the benefits and costs, and it's compared to what? So, and that kind of came up in the discussion today, right? So if you're comparing it to being, let's say, a landless or a near landless agricultural worker in Lampung, and then there's a palm oil plantation, and that's in the southern part of Sumatra, and then a plantation opens nearby or in the neighboring province, and you can be recruited to become a worker there and maybe get a steady income, then for those people it may be a slight improvement in livelihood, and that may be why they can be recruited to be workers in that situation. I've been trying to take the macro political economy view, so kind of the airplane view, which is this picture of huge areas being converted into palm oil. And even I remember back in the 90s in East Kalimantan, when you moved from selective logging back in the period where the timber companies were searching for trees. Well, actually the regulations then were in some areas at least 50 centimeters or other areas 60 centimeters diameter trees to cut. That still left even with the skidding trails and the logging roads and the like, it still left some trees standing, it left some secondary forest remaining, and some wildlife, some ecological services, as the economists call it, in place. When you started clearing for pulp and paper plantations, and now for palm oil plantations, on the environmental side, first of all, you're losing tremendous biodiversity. Then immediately related to that, you're losing opportunities for the communities that live in and around the forest. The folks who used to be able to go collect different forest products, which I think still is a significant percent of their income, if not monetized, but some of them collected and export different commodities, rattan or bird's nests or other things, but also in kind, things that they use in their communities for home building, for food, hunting for wild boar and other things, that they're losing that when this is being converted into land. The health impact, I mean, the areas that they're burning are not very large. I mean, the evidence, we say going back to the big fire events in 1997, 98, and then I think there's been some in this past year that where smoke and haze has come across the straits to Singapore. At least in 97, 98, it was later shown that some of these were coming from palm oil areas, although some of the companies denied it. So there's been evidence that fire is just a quick and easy way to clear land. Now, it's a quick and easy way for a Sweden agricultural family or community to clear 2 hectares or 3 hectares. It's a quick and easy way for a company to clear 20 or 30 or 100. And that's where I think then you're getting serious health effects from that, because if it's just a small plot, I don't think they're being terribly affected by the haze. Well, the Indonesian regulatory environment, the big thing this year is the agreement with Norway on RED Plus for climate change that has a rather weak now implementing instruction from the president, but at least is supposed to it's supposed to stop new projects for 2 years to give the Indonesian regulators a chance to look at this, as well as to have climate change benefits from no new permits. I mean, I think at the national level, you see some commitment to, no burning, no clearing of forests for palm oil, and the problem for many years and in multiple sectors in Indonesia has not been a lack of good regulations. It's been in enforcement, and it's been in conflicting regulations between different levels or sectors of administration. I mean, and I've heard some environmental lawyers say this as well. Indonesia doesn't suffer from a lack of laws, it suffers from too many laws. So it's got plenty of regulations, and people can point to different ones, and the classic story in palm oil is that due to regional autonomy policies, the district and provincial level authorities have the right to give out land use permits and the plantation permits. So there's 2 levels of permits that are still supposed to go back to the central government, have the area checked for, is this in the proper designated type of forest, and is this a legitimate license, before, after the end of a long process, they get what's called a HGU, which is hak guna, or a legal use right for that forest for the plantation, because they don't actually sell it, but they now give long leases, like 70 or more years for the plantations. That's where the problem is. There are many reports of companies getting those local level permits and starting to clear the land on the assumption that their local permit and their alliance with local leaders will be sufficient before the national government even gets a chance to look at it and say, wait, you're not supposed to be going there, you're not supposed to be going there. In forestry, I've seen for a few years, the Central Forestry Administration has been trying to sort of re-centralize authority. After years of being centralized under Suharto, regional autonomy, then the regional governments in various parts of the country got the authority to give out logging permits. And then everyone sort of said, oh my God, there's so many thousands of these small permits now being given out that it's causing more deforestation and poor logging practices than when it was a smaller number of permits from the central government being given out for large concessions. So they tried to stop some of the regional governments. Actually, they had a policy then and new regulations to say, no, you have to come through the central government. But there's still this tension because in the regions, they say, no, now we're in a period of democratization and regional autonomy, and we have the right to decide. And the resource booming provinces view this as economic and political opportunity. I mean, legal and otherwise, often to gain money for political campaigns as well. So you have problems of bribery and corruption in the permitting process at the local level too that is complicated.